Hi, everybody. Sorry, I'm a couple minutes late. It's been a crazy day. All right, so we are going to be talking about wax moth today, and as always, love to see where everyone's from, and you're welcome to post in the comments questions you have related to what I'm talking about or not related. And I'll get to them as I can. As I'm waiting a couple minutes for other people to come on, I thought it'd be interesting for you guys. So I live here on the Big Island of Hawaii, and we are in the process of selling the house and moving back to Pennsylvania. And for some of you that might not be aware of this, living on the Big Island is a little bit different if you wanted to, say, buy a property. When we were looking to buy this house, I had no idea there was a thing called lava zones. So when you are looking to get a mortgage, you most likely are not going to get a mortgage if you are in certain lava zones, which means there are areas of the island that have a greater chance of being taken over by flowing hot lava. So this island is, just volcanic mountains, one of which is very active. And so there were areas that we wanted to live that we actually couldn't because you had to just buy the property out, like flat out, in order to be able to live there. Also, a lot of land here is privately owned, and so it's leasehold. A lot of farms here, you get a 35-year lease that you purchase. And if you were to build a house on that or make improvements, once that lease is up, there's no guarantee that you would be able to extend that lease and keep going. So then that house is lost. You can buy leases from people, but then, one second. Owen? Hey, Owen. Go into the bathroom to do that, okay? You have to be quiet. Mommy's making a video. My son is his last day of school. It was his preschool graduation, and he wants to wash his graduation cup that school gave him. Oh, I see what Francisco says that you worked for Kona Queens. How was that? I have not heard the best things about people that worked for Kona Queens when I was at Big Island Bees across the street. So, wax moth. I'm interested to see if people have experiences with wax moth. Please leave it in, good or bad, things that work well for you and things that haven't worked. There's a lot of theories, that people have about things to do, ways to prevent infestations, ways to keep equipment clean, what to do to not introduce wax moth to your hive. Some of them work and some of them don't. And some of them are toxic. So it's always good to just hear from people that have tried these things out, as opposed to just reading something and doing it and finding out the hard way. All right. So for this video, I'm going to talk about the wax moth. There's the greater wax moth, lesser wax moth. Just get into a little bit about their life cycle because I think it's kind of interesting to learn about how they work. How they're different from small hive beetle larvae, because it can be confusing to be able to tell the difference. The hives that are most at risk, how to prevent wax moth infestations, what to do when you see an infestation, and some of my experiences with wax moth. Since I live in Hawaii, I don't have bees anywhere where there is a frost. There are areas of this island where there is a frost, but it's, higher up in elevation, considerably high up in elevation. So, I don't think anybody lives up that high. So for us, that means that pests are our biggest problem because there's no frost to decrease the numbers. The population just increases and increases and increases. It's just like a perfect breeding ground for insects. Um, which at first was great for honeybees, but now that more pests have been introduced to the island, now they have a lot of things that can kill the hive. So the wax moth, you have the greater wax moth, which is like a pale brownish gray color. It looks like a tiny little moth. Can actually be kind of hard to see on the honeycomb because it kind of blends in if your comb is a little bit lighter in color. They're like 3/4 of an inch long, the moth, or for those of you in millimeters, that's 20 millimeters. They usually congregate in larger numbers versus the lesser wax moth. They're more of a solitary insect. So the female will lay 300 to 600 eggs in a cluster on the honeycomb or in small cracks in your beekeeping material, assuming that your hive is made of wood. And that is a benefit to using non-wooden material, some different kinds of plastic for like the flow hive frames are plastic, and the apame, or however you pronounce that, hive, that's a benefit to working with those materials, is that the wax moth can't eat into it the way it does with wood, I don't think. So after 3 to 5 days, an egg will hatch. Now, the optimal temperature for wax moth is like about 84 degrees Fahrenheit. So 29 to 35 degrees Celsius, or 84 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit, they say. So when it's at that temperature, good job. When it's at that temperature, the eggs will hatch in about 3 to 5 days. When it's cooler out, it can take a lot longer and the egg hatching can be delayed. And it can be, I've read that it can be like, if it's about 65 degrees Fahrenheit, 18 Celsius, hatching happens around 30 days after the female lays those eggs. So the larvae hatch and they're like creamy white colored. Once they're fully developed, they're more of like a light gray. And then when they're fully grown, they're like a little bit like roughly an inch long, or 28 millimeters. So when you're seeing little larvae crawling around your frames, that is definitely not a honeybee, because those larvae are always in the cells. And the small hive beetle larvae are very small, and they never develop to be big worms. When you're seeing those like really big fat worms, those are always going to be the wax moth. They are not going to be small hive beetle larvae that large. So when they hatch, they will tunnel in the honeycomb, and they will line the tunnels with this silky web, moving around from comb to comb, creating this massive webbing. And it says that newly hatched larvae can move to neighboring hives, which is interesting. I didn't know that the wax moth could travel all on their own to neighboring hives. And there are studies that have tracked this, and they said that newly hatched larvae can travel more than 50 yards, which is pretty far for that little larva. They're very active in warm weather, so in the cooler climates, it's not as much of a problem. But the thing to keep in mind is that they can be dormant for a longer period of time. So you might think your equipment is safe because it was cold out, but then when it starts to warm up, then you might have some of these wax moth hatching. So they will be inactive in extreme cold. Their optimal temperature is like about 32 degrees Fahrenheit, which is, 80s. I'm 32 degrees Celsius, about 80s Fahrenheit. And when food is scarce or it's cooler out, the larva period may extend to up to 5 months, which is a really long time for a larva to just be crawling around. Otherwise, the larva will be larva for about 19 days, and after hatching as an egg. So this larva, when it's fully developed, it'll spin a cocoon in a mass of webbing. And that's a telltale sign that you see wax moth, is you just see this webbing across the cells within your honeycomb. And you'll probably see like little black specks in this webbing. And I'm assuming that's their feces. It might also be a little bit of like other debris and stuff within the hive that's getting stuck in there. And you'll see those really fat worms. The worms, you'll see small ones, but then you'll also see just like a variety of sizes of those larvae. And then, so what they do is they will bore holes that are about like the shape of a canoe, and they will spin a cocoon and just be in that little canoe-shaped hole within the wooden equipment. So the damage that they're doing isn't just to the honeycomb, but they're actually just like boring holes into the frames and your boxes. They pupate for 14 days, but up to 2 months if it's cooler out, and then emerge as a fully grown adult wax moth. So that's the wax moth life cycle. They really prefer the pollen. They're not looking, so the frames you really want to keep protected aren't going to be just like the totally drawn out empty frames of comb. And the frames that you spun that were full of honey aren't going to be as much at risk as the frames that had the pupa on them. Because when bees have their frames of brood, you're not just going to have the brood on there, but usually they have that like little rainbow arc at the top of the frame that has food on it. It'll have nectar, honey, and bee bread, which is the pollen mixed with nectar, for easy access to feed that brood. So those are the frames that are optimal for the wax moth. And then there's the lesser wax moth, which is smaller. They're like a silvery color, so a little bit different in color, but don't look all that much different. They're just a little bit smaller. And their larvae are white with a brown head. They feed on comb, pollen, and they might more so be seen on the litter, on the bottom board of a hive, or if you have a screen bottom, but put that corrugated plastic underneath, they can be found feeding off of those little bits of pollen and debris that fell onto the bottom inside your beehive, and are more so solitary. So more likely to see just like one or two crawling around. So I guess I'll get to the comments in a little bit, but thanks for everyone showing where you're from. It's nice to see. Bula from Fiji. It's funny. We stopped in Fiji once on our way to New Zealand. We had a very long layover because of the flights where it got delayed and stuff. And I remember walking through the airport and people said Bula like all day long. I mean, we figured out like, you know, what it meant, but that reminds me of when we went to New Zealand. We were only in Fiji for like 8 hours. But hey everybody, so damage to bees. I mean, I already touched on this, but it destroys your comb and it bores holes in the wood, so it can really destroy equipment. If you live in warm climates like me, you probably noticed in some of my videos my equipment is pretty bad. The Galena Farms gave me that one hive kit, so sometimes I'll just use that for my videos. But otherwise, a lot of my boxes were just boxes that the farm I worked for didn't use anymore. They were like the throwaway pile. And so I have all kinds of beat up boxes, and it's not a problem here. But for you guys, when you want to be able to close up your hive for winter, that's not the equipment you want. Um, does become a problem for me. The only time is really robbing and when I want to use a vaporizer for oxalic acid, because you want to seal up that hive. And I'm taking duct tape and just like covering so much of the hive and all of the holes in it. Now, wax moth can kill your colony. It's just wax moth is, like an opportunistic pest, like small hive beetle. You're not going to see it destroy a strong hive like varroa mites. Varroa mites, I believe the big reason why people hate varroa mites and talk about treating, and there's so much talk about what to do about varroa mites, is because they can take a hive that was strong and cause it to collapse, because they just attack the brood and they bring viruses and they just weaken the hive. But hive beetles and wax moth are more opportunistic. So it can sometimes be hard to tell what the cause of a hive's collapse was originally, because you might see wax moth signs, you might see wax moth crawling around, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that was what caused the collapse. It might have just been one of the things that came in once the hive was already starting to collapse. Often a hive is collapsing and having problems well before the beekeeper is aware of it. And so that's why timing is a really big part of beekeeping. And once you start to see a problem, you don't really want to wait and see when it comes to things like this, because it can often just be too late to do anything. So, wax moth will. I mean, I actually, before I started researching this, I didn't realize that wax moths were traveling like that. I thought that most of the time the beekeeper was introducing wax moth. I didn't know that wax moth could just come and like infiltrate a hive and travel that far. Okay, here you go. I'm giving the iPad to my son so that he can be quiet for the next 45 minutes. But the most at-risk hives are going to be the small ones that have a small population, either because it's early summer and the population is just low because of the time of year and the lack of food for them to gather. Can you go over there? It can be hives that you just split. Or it can be hives that are struggling because maybe they already have nosema or tracheal mites or other issues like that. But another big thing that can cause a hive to start to have a wax moth infestation, or hive beetles, or both, is having a lot of comb in it that is unguarded. And so that's often where the wax moths will start, is on the comb that the bees aren't protecting. So especially when the population is low, like in the springtime or late summer and fall, you don't want a lot of comb in there that the bees can't protect. So they might move on to the unguarded comb first, and then as the hive weakens and the population continues to decrease, then they'll move on to frames with bees on it, which is, also the frames with pollen on it. And a reason to really keep an eye on things like pollen patties. And if you're using the Swiffer sheets or the Brawny Dynamax sheets under the lid, that is a place that I have many times seen a wax moth larva crawl out of. They're areas that the bees do not guard, and so they're places that you'll see them crawling around. It's not a problem if you see one of these, you just take it out, I have a video on my shorts feed of a wax moth larva crawling around. I had taken a video of a bee hatching, and then as I was looking at the video, I noticed the wax moth larva crawling in and out of the cells. But so what happens is that they don't just start to get to the comb that is empty, but then they'll go to comb that has bees on it. And then what they'll start to do is actually eat the wax capping off of the pupa. So what they call it, let me find it. The name of this is um they call it like bald brood, I think. Did I write that down? Um So, in pupa, with the capped cells, the bees that are pupating and have a capped cells, sometimes wax moth will eat the capping over it. And so, if the bees are close enough to maturity, they will hatch with deformed wings or deformed legs. Some of the adult bees, they won't be able to emerge from the cell, and they'll be trapped by all of that silken web that they have over the front of it. I think they call it bald brood, is because you can see the brood in the cells and they've taken off the capping of it. So, what to do about it? This is what I do about it. I got a chest freezer. I've read a lot of things to do about wax moth. Some of them I'm sure work. The thing is that here we have cockroaches that like to bite. Like literally, they will walk over to my feet and bite me. And I won't know, like I'll just be sitting outside on my patio and at nighttime and they just like come over and will bite me. And they're huge. They're like, this big, so like roughly 2 inches plus the antenna, which are more than the length of their body. And I cannot put, some people will take frames that they spun, they call them wet frames, after you take the honey out and spin it, and now you just have drawn out honeycomb that's empty. People will put that into like contractors, heavy duty garbage bags and seal that up. Uh, Here in Hawaii, that does not work because cockroaches will eat through the garbage bags. There's no garbage bag here. I mean, maybe we recently had our house tinted for termites, which is had to do in order for to sell the house here and to somebody that wants to be financed. And because I hated the fact that we had to do that and expose ourselves and kill all of the insects around our home. But they gave us these neoprene bags. Now that maybe the cockroaches can't eat through, but they can eat through the garbage bags. They eat solid chunks of wax. The cockroaches, they're crazy. They're insane. So for me, I bought a chest freezer. Even when I had a studio apartment, I was living in the old grafting shack of Big Island, Queens. When it was their original owners, they rented their old grafting shack to me, and it was just a studio, just one space was like a hot pot and a mini fridge, and the backyard. I just put a chest freezer back there. And all my beehives were on other people's properties. There wasn't any space really for me to put anything. But right back in the back, um, I mean, it was like really the only thing I bought. I didn't own any furniture, but I bought a chest freezer, and that's where I store my comb. Since I harvest comb honey, it's really important to freeze the comb at some point before you're storing it long term. Some people will harvest it, cut it up, and then put it into containers or jars and then freeze it. I just put all of my comb into boxes, into supers, and stick all of the supers because now I have a couple of chest freezers, and it's the one is like 12 cubic feet, so I can fit a few supers, the whole super in there, and then there's baskets and stuff to hang more comb, and I put the whole frame in there, and then when I'm ready to harvest I pull it out. um So that's really the best place to store your comb and to keep it safe. It's also great if you're concerned about like any other kind of equipment because you can put like a whole beehive in there if you wanted to. Um, and I have a broken chest freezer. So the first one that I bought when I had that studio apartment, that was like a 3 cubic foot one. It was pretty small. And that one broke. So now I will, that's my backup. I actually use it to store beeswax and other random things that insects will eat. But what I'll do is I'll put it in a chest freezer that works. And then if I need more space in my chest freezers, I will then take it and put it in the broken chest freezer because the broken chest freezer still has a seal on it. And I haven't found that any insects get into there, and not even the little ants. And so I will use a broken chest freezer as storage. Um, and it's really a great place to store all of that stuff. It's also, if you are looking to do comb honey or really any kind of, you're going to be harvesting honey, you can just like, I will sometimes just pull honey off of a hive, and if it's not enough to harvest, to do a big harvest, and clean the extractor and do everything for the day, I will just store it in the freezer for, like a month, and then do a full harvest once I'm ready to harvest from all of my hives at once. Like, say if you have a few hives that are just like bringing in a ton of honey, you don't want all that honey sitting on the hive, or you're looking to, you need to treat or something and you want to take that off the hive, you can store it in the freezer. So a chest freezer is really, really helpful. Other people will, I mean, you can put them in those like heavy duty garbage bags and seal it up, especially if you have a garage that gets cold out. Let's see, some you can put them even in like tote bins. This hive butlers are pretty much a tote bin that is the shape to hold a whole bunch of frames. If you have cockroach issues, then you can put, like bricks and stuff to keep the lid down a little bit more solid. If you're concerned that there's, I don't own any of the hive butlers. I've never seen them in person. So if there isn't like a decent seal on it, you can always just put bricks down to make sure that the lid is on tight and there's not that little bit of a gap that insects can get into. I did an experiment and I took, a box, a nuke box, and I put 2 frames of drawn out comb that was sitting around. I didn't see any wax moth on, or any larva or webbing or anything. And I put that in the nuke box and I covered it up. And the next day, less than 24 hours later, there was a wax moth on one of the comb. 3 days later, there was 2 adult wax moths hanging out on the comb. And I do not have any beehives on my property. So it's just interesting to see how fast it was found. And now it's important that if like when I did this experiment, I put the lid on it. When the frames are just sitting out, no wax moth were on it. So if you are just storing frames that are from honey that are empty now, often just having them exposed to light can be enough to keep them safe, especially if it's cold out. But I'll get into a little bit more about storing your frames. I really just, the best way to do it is to freeze it. The commercial place I worked for, what they did was they had a refrigerated room. So see, what is the exact temperature? I read here they say 39 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty cold. Or just having a bright light on it inside the room, or both. Ideally, what they would do is they had this air conditioned room. I don't think they had it at 39 degrees because that would have been a lot of, they need more air conditioners for that. But they had a room in their warehouse that they kept air conditioned, fully sealed up, and they had a bright light in one corner, and that's where they stored their frames that they didn't have on the hives, and that worked. That was enough for them to keep their comb safe. Um, if you leave your frames out, I mean, it's not the end of the world if wax moths do get on these frames and they're outside the hive and you're just storing them, and maybe they were fine over winter, but now it like started to warm up and you didn't keep an eye on them, and now you're finding some are infested, or you're concerned that there might be some larvae in the crevices or something. You can't just freeze it. And for my comb honey, I usually freeze it for at least 48 hours. Here on this website, they said 4.5 hours is long enough. Um, but freezing it just before you put it into the hive is sufficient to not introduce an infestation to your bees, because ultimately that's your goal. Is you just don't want to introduce this to your bees and cause this stress to your colony, or potentially cause them to collapse. It's no fun if they destroy comb that you had sitting out that you wanted to give back to your bees. But assuming that this isn't your business and everything isn't, just like money that it's costing you, so to speak, but it's a hobby and you're just looking for your bees to be healthy, then if you are concerned that there is wax moth on your frames, you can't just freeze the whole frame. And if there is wax moth on it, then the bees will clean the frame out. And if you see webbing and all that kind of stuff, I would just cut that part out and freeze it and give it to the bees. And it's not that big of a deal if that happens. You just don't want to introduce equipment to your bees. So if you're just supers from the year before, just taking your hive tool, and it's just good practice to scrape away all that extra propolis and beeswax that might be gunking up around the sides, because it just makes it harder to pull frames in and out and stuff, and storing them in an area where they are going to be exposed to light and open air, like in your garage or a shed. And then you just take boxes and rotate them. So if like one box is like this, then the box you stack on top of that would not a good demonstration. Is rotated, so they're not just, you just rotate them on top of each other, so that they're not just stacked up on top of each other, so that there's light being exposed to them. Okay, before I get into a little bit more about this, get to some of the questions you guys might have about them. Nice to see people from all over the world. California and South Carolina, Maryland, Fiji. Scott says, hard to get insurance. I missed the upper part. It is hard to get insurance here in Hawaii on different things. Is people just are like, oh, we don't bother with that state. There's not enough population, I suppose, sometimes. And thanks to the people that are donated and contributed to the channel. Weston says, Larissa, I met you back in October when I visited. You were selling honey at a market in Kona. You were one of the people that inspired me to start my YouTube channel and start beekeeping. Huh, interesting. That must have been years ago, because I haven't sold honey in a long time. Nice to meet you again. I do not like doing markets, but I have done a few in over the years, and I like it when I do them every so often. Um, Pamela says, question, is it true that buying bees from the south in a northern climate is less likely they will not overwinter? Um, Not always. I mean, a lot of the queen breeders are in warm climates. So, I mean, there's a great chance that your bees are going to overwinter. Uh, there's very few people that are getting bees from their climate, especially if they live in northern climates. So it's just really hard to do it otherwise. It's just, yeah, it's great if you can buy a beehive from a beekeeper that doesn't want to keep bees anymore, or if you split your hives. I always recommend to people when they split their hives to, especially if they start with two, to always buy equipment for three hives. Split the hives so that they go into winter with three hives, and buy a queen locally, because even if one of your hives has seems to have decent genetics, it's always great to buy from a local queen breeder and introduce those genetics. But to start, it's really hard, if not impossible, for a lot of people to in northern climates to get started in beekeeping without buying bees from southern states. And a lot of those people, their hives do just fine, so I wouldn't be like too deterred or to think that the odds are against you um, too much, because it's a lot of people do it and it works out okay. It's just not ideal. And of course, then there's always genetics. You know, there are bees that are bred with genetics from areas that are colder climates. You know, Russia is a very cold climate, and you're going to find places selling bees that are Russian bees. So it's possible. Let's see. Cheryl says, Canton, Ohio, Sunday afternoon, a big swarm went into the neighbor's very high tree. About an hour later, they went right back into their hive. Interesting. I guess they didn't find anywhere better. Um, Gary says, I'm curious to see what Gary has to say. Eager to hear the moments wax moths may have encroached into your hives and frames. Always tried to keep a lookout for them. I can recall about a dozen times where they spoiled my beekeeping experience. So only once did I introduce wax moth to a hive and had it collapse. I don't have a lot of stories about wax moths doing damage to my hive. I've met beekeepers. I met a beekeeper from India, and he said that their biggest issue was wax moth. Um, I am not very good.
Okay, yes? Lay on the couch and watch.
Sure. I am not. I'm not that thorough at cleaning my equipment before I put it in the hive. If a hive is strong and I am adding an empty super and frames onto the hive, and the hive is already 3 boxes, I maybe will take my hive tool and scrape some of the wax off. I might do like a very basic quick check to see that there's not, like, cocoons or anything. But I'm not very thorough when it comes to that, and I haven't had any issues with it. I found that the hives with strong population do not have a problem with getting rid of any wax moth that might be in the hive. But I have met people who have had wax moth issues. So I'm curious to hear from people that have had horror stories from it. I've always been under the impression that if wax moth is usually introduced, and you have to have a weak hive, and you have to introduce it to them with, giving them frames that were sitting around and there was wax moth on them. But after reading this, I had no idea that wax moth larvae can travel up to 50 yards. Because then that's a different story. I did recently have a student show me a photo of wax moth larvae crawling around their bottom board, and I didn't know that was more so a sign of the lesser wax moth, and that's really easy fix to just off the bottom board and get rid of those. Show it to Daddy. He can help you out. Now, more so, some of the issues that I've had with wax moth is the ways that people keep their equipment clean before they give it back to the bees. Some people will put mothballs in with their comb. I've read mothballs and PDB crystals. I don't do any of those things to keep my comb safe. I know a chest freezer isn't, and it can be an expensive piece of equipment to get, but I feel like for small scale, the freezer is the best option. And once you have more, then a refrigerated room is probably second best. I would also be concerned if I was putting it into a trash bag that they would get kind of moldy. So I'm curious if anyone does put their frames into sealed trash bags. Do you have issues with all of that getting moldy or not? My son somehow logged out. Needs my password again. Okay. Let's see. Telmar says, getting my first nuke tomorrow. Should I use the green drone comb yet? I had another student ask me about when to put green drone comb into their hive. I don't use foundation, so I don't have a general rule of thumb, but I will say that since I don't use foundation, the majority of the drone comb that I see the bees making is in the second brood box of my hives. That sometimes is like 5 frames of drone comb. Sometimes it's less, but most of it is in the second box. So you can put 1 frame in that first brood box somewhere in there. I wouldn't put it like right in the middle in those first like 4 frames. You want the very first frame, the first 2 frames on either side of your box to be for food. And then you want the middle frames to be like the middle 4 frames to be just regular worker foundation. But then you can put 1 frame of drone comb off to the side if you like. But I would more so put it into the second brood box. Or depending on the time of year, more so once it's like late May or summertime, start of summer. And you just want to give the bees an opportunity. It's just one way that bees can trap varroa mites, because then hives don't need drones. It's not doing too much to benefit them, uh, other than good for genetic diversity in your area. But it can be a way for bees to trap varroa mites. So it's good to give them a couple frames, but it doesn't have to be done immediately. You can do it in the second box. You can put 1 in the first box. Just don't put it right in the middle, because the middle is like where they first start. And that you want worker bees. You don't want drone comb. Gary says, Francisco, I knew a commercial beekeeper that did that burning in his warehouse. It did react with all the galvanized tin on the walls and ceiling of the shop. I've used it to sun dry sliced fruit. Homer says, should I wait until I actually notice? And so if you're using the drone comb for mite control, then I would just wait until you have at least 4 frames of brood in there. Just throw 1 in your first box and then put another couple into the second box and see if they take to it. Back Bee Broken Beekeeping says, if you are just In a 5-frame nuke, I would not waste 1 frame for that. However, once you move it to a 10 frame, you definitely could. If you do use green comb, you have to make sure you don't let the brood hatch, or you'll do the opposite of what you're aiming for. Yeah, you want to pull it out once the brood is capped if you're looking to lower varroa mite levels. But you just don't want a ton of it in there. But if my husband's asking me to write down the passcode again. There you go, burn after. It really just doesn't matter that much. I don't think so. If anyone disagrees, let me know. But I just like to do one and see what happens. If it's empty, don't put another one in. Just wait to see until they start to fill out that 1 frame, and then you can add another one in. Just don't put it right in the middle, because that's where the worker bee brood usually is. Other comments. Virginia, Ohio, California, South Carolina. Gary says a freezer can help with light wax moth damage on frames with no bees on them. It'll destroy varroa on small hive beetle. Stack them evenly and leave for, I think if you stack them evenly and leave for 24 to 48 hours. Got cut off there. So if you have significant wax moth damage on your frames or slime from hive beetles, I cut it out. Some people like to save it, freeze it, and then give it back to the bees to see if they clean it up. Since the bees can get stuck in that, and the bees will ignore slimy stuff, it's very good possible that they'll also ignore the webbing from the wax moth. So I would take that out, because if you just give it back to the bees, they might not clean it up, and it might just be another place for the pests to go back and start to eat. And it is a great way to just prevent them from finding this comb in the first place. Patty says, if I keep my boxes in frames that are not being used in the barn where the sun will shine on them daily, or when the door is open, will that prevent them? It should, but you still want to just keep an eye on them. If it's not cold enough out, so here's the thing: you have wax moth, you have cockroaches are going to eat beeswax, and you have rodents that are going to eat beeswax. So when you're talking about wax moth, if you keep it out and rotate every other box so that sunlight is getting to the frames and they're not in darkness, none of the frames are in darkness. So not just the box, but the frames inside the box, and everything's being exposed to sunlight and air, you should be able to keep it safe from wax moth, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be safe from everything. So if you're in a warm climate, or if it's warm out that time of year, there's a good chance that there might be other things that are going to also eat it. So small hive beetle, rodents, wax moth, and cockroaches. And those cockroaches will eat a solid chunk of wax. Like they eat my candles. I have giant things of wax that are like these huge things that they just like gradually eat into. So if you have any of those things, if it's warm out, the sunlight's not going to keep it safe. It's just probably going to keep it safe from wax moth. If it's cold out, then cold enough out that rodents aren't going to be out crawling around, then the barn will keep it safe. Now, from rodents and most things, I've seen people hang them from hang wire from like the walls in their barns, so they're elevated, and that will keep rodents from getting to their wax moth, to the frames. And then if it's cold enough out, that will deter any insects from getting to it. And this is why I just get a chest freezer, guys, because wax moth isn't the only thing that's going to try to eat them, and it's hot here. So when it's cold out and it's like snowing out, you guys, they're safe. But once it starts to warm up, there's a few things that you have to worry about getting to these frames. Nicole says, what should I do if I'm seeing wax moth poo on my IPM board, but I can't find any moths or larvae? I have no idea what wax moth poo would look like. I don't really know how you would know what that is. You're going to see, if you don't see any wax moths and you don't see any larvae, the only other way that you're going to know there's an infestation is if you see the webbing or you see the cocoons. One second. So the signs of wax moth, other than the larva and the adult moth, are the cocoons or the webbing. If you're not seeing that, then I don't really think there is a way to know that droppings that you're seeing are from wax moth. They can be bits of pollen, they can be pieces from bee parts, they can be a few things. And even if it is feces from an insect that's not the honeybees, there's no telling that it's from the wax moth. But you're going to need to find them and figure out what it is that's causing the problem in the hive. And if you're not seeing a problem in the hive and you're not seeing any larvae and you're not seeing any moths or hive beetles or ants in the hive, then I wouldn't worry about it. But if that board is underneath the screen bottom, take that board out, because it looks like maybe when pollen and things are dropping on the board, stuff's coming in and eating it. And so that can be doing more harm than good, because the bees can't get to it to clean it the way they would if it was just the solid bottom of their beehive. So you're just kind of leaving this rotting material that's attracting pests to come to the hive, and we don't want to do that. Pamela says, is it true that buying bees from the... Oh, sorry. We already did that one. Backbee Broken Beekeeping says that if you stack the boxes on the sides so light shines onto the frames, it should prevent wax moth, but just like anything, it's not 100%. That is true. There's really just not... none of those things are 100% other than a chest freezer. It depends on how many hives you have, whether that is something that's feasible or not. Gary says, as wax moth pupa change from juvenile larvae into adults within silk mummified cocoons and paper-like shells, they're brutal. White cigar-like worms eat into your boxes with frames. A buffet for them. Yeah, that's true. I don't know if I've ever seen that in a hive. You can see photos of it online. They will just burrow those holes to those canoe shapes and just like destroy equipment. Airsoft Maze says, I'm starting off this year with 3 packages of Russian bees. Good luck. I hope it goes well. That sounded sarcastic, but I didn't mean it to be sarcastic. I hope your Russian bees do well. Gary says, my chickens loved cleaning out cocoons from dead outs. Amazing you can turn the box upside down, push hard, and still frames won't come out. Yeah, I can't remember. It was a long time ago, well before my son was born, that I had that one wax moth infestation. I don't remember why it had happened. I just know that the hive was just one box, and I had put a bunch of frames in it, maybe on top, and introduced wax moth. But yeah, if you have chickens are great for eating comb that has been infested with hive beetles, wax moth, anything with a larva, because they love those worms. Yeah, or drone comb. If you pull out drone comb that's capped for the sake of lowering varroa mite levels. They love that too. There is a place here in Hawaii that a nonprofit that's trying to help the, I forget what it's called, the Alala, or I can't remember. I think it begins with the letter A. It's a Hawaiian crow, and the place I worked for donated drone comb to them to feed the baby crows. Um, they loved it. It's a great source of something protein, I guess, for those baby birds. But I didn't know that the wax moth cocoons are so strong like that. The nuke that I had, that I found those two wax moths in, every time I opened it up, they would fly out, and then the next time I would open it, they were back in there again. But I never found the webbing or the larva crawling around. But it was just it was empty drawn out comb that I had sitting around. So I should really try again with some pollen and see, just for the sake of uh, taking some photos and videos. Airsoft Maze says people say Russian bees have a little bit of a temper. If anyone has Russian bees and has found that to be the case or not to be the case, let us know. I don't believe that there are Russian bees here in Hawaii. I don't know the genetics of the bees I got when I was in Pennsylvania. Probably an Italian mixture. But I don't recall that I've heard them being too aggressive. I mean, I doubt that they're as friendly as Italian bees, but I haven't heard that they're too bad from people. Uh-oh. The comments just shifted. Okay, let's see. CM says, Harmon says spring in the Netherlands. That sounds nice. I was in the Netherlands 20 years ago. 18 years ago. A lot of fun. When should I add the queen excluder? I don't use queen excluder, so I'm not a great person to ask if you want to use a queen excluder. But if you want 2 brood boxes on your hive, then I usually tell people, if they're going to use a queen excluder, to put their honey box on. So you have your 1 brood box, and you would have another box usually that you allow the queen to lay in if she wants to. I found in my hives that it's like half brood, half honey. Half the time, or a good most of the time, it's like half brood, half honey in the second box, and then the third box that I would put up there is all honey completely. So when you're putting that third box on, if you're going to use a queen excluder, I would still put that box on and let the bees just start to clean up the frames and start to draw comb. And once you start to see them building comb and going up into that box, then put the queen excluder on, just so that the queen excluder isn't deterring the bees. And, they're already up there and working on it, and it smells like bees and beeswax, because sometimes bees don't always move up as fast with the queen excluder. Now, that is something that I've just assumed, or something that I kind of think might happen. I don't know of anyone that's actually really done a serious test on hives to see whether that is the case or not. Linda says, what are the options if you don't have a big enough freezer? If you don't have a big enough freezer, you can always put some frames into your refrigerator. They stand up on, that short shelf. You stand up, you can fit a few in there. I've done that. Just to keep them safe for a little bit, especially the frames that have brood on them and have a little bit of pollen on them. You can put them into heavy duty, like contractors sealed bags. You can get a Hive butler or a tote bin and put them in there. And if there's just a little bit of a gap between under the lid and the bin, like the typical plastic tote bins you see in the store, I would put some bricks on top to make sure that the lid is on tight to keep um, ants and cockroaches from sneaking in under the lid. Or I had frames in contractors bags, taped up, and then I put them in a tote bin and put stuff on top of the tote bin, and still cockroaches got into it and destroyed it. But if you are not in a warm climate, um, uh, the bins might be sufficient, or the trash bags might be sufficient, especially when it's cold out. If you can keep it in like a cold basement or a shed, a garage, barn, and if it's cold out, you can just rotate your boxes so that light is getting into the frames of all these boxes, and that will deter wax moth. The thing is that wax moth is not the only thing that is going to destroy these frames. You have to keep it safe from mice and cockroaches and wax moth. Ants, you don't have to worry about too much, because mostly what they're going to do is just eat the honey and clean out the frames for you. So that's not so bad. But the wax moth and the rodents and the cockroaches will eat the wax. And small hive beetle. Now, if you're just concerned about harming your hive and you don't really care if your wax is getting destroyed by some rats eating it, you just don't want to harm your hive by introducing a pest to it because it was in storage for so long, then if you are afraid that small hive beetle or wax moth are going to get to it, then usually keeping a bright light like in your basement on 24/7, or having a bright light on somewhere 24/7 works for some people. Having it in a cold room or a place where it's cold, like ideally below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and exposed to light is next best. And of course, post a Craigslist or Facebook that you're looking for a broken chest freezer and see if anybody has one laying around and they're just don't feel like disposing of it, and go get it. And then once you spin these frames, you can put them in the chest freezer. It's best to freeze them, throw them in your freezer for 4 or 5 hours, and then put them into the chest freezer that's broken. But for the most part, it's probably safe from wax moth, and you can just throw it in there. And small hive beetles, and you can just chance it or just freeze it and just do it in shifts and put it in your freezer for just a few hours. And then there's mothballs and that PDB crystals some people use. I don't know what that is made of. So I don't really know exactly what that's going to do to the honeycomb. Just keep in mind that honeycomb is porous, and if you heavily smoke a hive, it's going to make the comb taste like smoke. So things like mothballs can make your comb, can maybe make the comb taste funny if you are going to be harvesting it, or the bees might not take to it. Trelawney says, I'm feeding a new colony syrup using a top feeder. I went to refill it this week and found larvae swimming around. Looked like small hive beetle. How do I prevent this? It depends on what the feeder is. I mean, there are feeders that have a screen or something, or there's feeders that are a jar that just have a little drip at the top that bees can access. So it might be the feeder. You can change that out to something that doesn't have such a big space for that. If there are no dead bees in the feeder, I mean, was it making the syrup go bad? I guess. Was it a lot of larvae? It's kind of odd that there was larvae in there. That they fell into this syrup. like where did they come from? I mean, you can also just look into why there's small hive beetle larvae crawling around in your hive. Like, was there a pollen patty up above it that they were getting to and falling into? Because you also might want to put some small hive beetle traps into the hive to just prevent there from being small hive beetle larvae crawling around also. But if there are dead bees in the feeder, then change out the feeder because there's something it's not working properly if it's killing the bees. If you're just finding an occasional small hive beetle larva, like just one or two, I wouldn't worry about it. I would just try it again and see what happens. And if you see more small hive beetle larvae in it, then I would look to see why larvae are in your hive and put some traps in or something to deter it. Some people have had good luck with peppermint in their hive to deter small hive beetles. Um, or it could be wax moth larvae. They can be hard to determine the difference if it's just the larva floating around, because the wax moth larvae start out really small and then get larger. Tomar says, just got my suit and I'm so surprised how hot it is. And that was in my house. Yeah, it's suits. I never bought a suit. I've been beekeeping for 12 years. I never bought a suit. My first few years, I wore pants. Wore tall socks. I put them over my pant legs. I just wore a baggy, long sleeve white cotton shirt and got a veil that just tied and had gloves that came up to my elbows. And that was sufficient, when you just have like one or two hives. The farm I worked for bought a suit when I first started there. I still have that suit. It's pretty tattered, but I don't use it often enough to really warrant buying a new suit. I've bought many, many veils, and you might want to get a veil, just like a veil with a helmet, and not go with a full length suit. Marine Life Conservation says my bees are from Pennsylvania. Well, that's good. Usually, when you get bees from northern states, you're going to get them just a little bit late in the year, which isn't a problem, but sometimes hard to find. So it's good that you found some maybe more local bees if that's where you live. Backbee Broken Beekeeping says to Trelawney about the feeder and the hive beetle larva floating around. To feed less so that they have less time with the sugar syrup. That is a good idea. You could try just a little bit less. And at the very least, if you have the same problem, it's not going to affect so much of the syrup. Telmar says, do all suits have plastic zippers? I don't know. My suit does. Probably. I'm glad my suit does because metal zippers get stuck because metal doesn't last long here in Hawaii. It gets all rusty really fast. Like our stainless steel appliances that we bought a year ago that already have rust all over them. Junebug says, what do you do for small hive beetle? I've seen a total of about 5 between 2 hives and don't want the number to increase. Yeah, 5 small hive beetles crawling around isn't something to worry about, but what's best is to have something on the top and the bottom of your beehive so you have a trap under the lid. Some people put beetle blasters, which are really cheap, but a little annoying and cumbersome and can lead to some oil dripping into your hive. Or you can put unscented Swiffer sheets under the lid and brawny Dynamax towels under the lid. And then since small hive beetles are very bad here, I also have a screened bottom with oil pan under my bottom board, and that's what catches the most beetles. There are traps to put on over the entrance to keep beetles from getting into the hive altogether. I've never actually experimented with them. So if anyone has a good or bad experience, let me know. What I don't recommend if you start to see more small hive beetles in your hive is to close up a screened bottom because I think that they can get into the hive through that screened bottom. And I always found an increase in small hive beetles when I had my hives on screen bottoms. So I put the them back all on the screen bottom with oil pan below. And it's a tight fit, so beetles can't get into the hive through that area. Gary says, one time I left 2 cleaned up 10 frame double deep dead outs on bottom board, wanting to put on split single increases. I forgot about them. What a mess. Combined to a strong hive would have been better. Yeah, that's the problem. You forget about something in beekeeping and it can cause a big problem, unfortunately. Ronnie says, the colony is only 4 weeks old. Can't believe I already have small hive beetle larva. Was on both sides of the feeder. One side was dry, one side had syrup. Won't they still lay without syrup? Are you seeing the adult hive beetles? I would put some, unless you're just seeing a couple larvae in there, or if you have pollen patties in there, I would take most of it out, if not all of it out, and put some hive beetle traps in there, unless it was just like 1 or 2 that just so happened to be in there. And you really just, yeah, you are right. You don't want to see the larva. The adults are like, okay, it happens. You really don't want to see the larva crawling around. But if it is just 1 or 2, don't worry too much. The bees just don't man the areas that aren't their comb. So like the back bee broken beekeeping said, the feeders, and really like the pollen patties. I just don't use them at all. You can buy dry pollen and add it to your syrup, put it inside that, and that's a much better way to feed bees pollen if you have small hive beetle issues. Daniel says, do you have any tips for starting a new hive with the plastic foundation? Well, you want to make sure that your foundation is waxed, of course. And if you can get it, if it's your first year, this isn't going to be possible. But if you're going to get a package of bees and put them in a hive, it's best to have at least 1 frame of honeycomb in there. If it's like someone from your bee club, that it can even give you just a little piece that you put in a rubber band, or if you have frames from the previous year, even if the frame is like a super shallow medium and it's not the deep size frame you need, you can still put it in there into that first box. It helps to just not put the bees into a totally empty box with all that plastic foundation and expect them to take to it and start building so fast. Definitely don't leave extra space. Have your frames next to each other, so 10 frames in that 10 frame box, not 9 frames, to make it easier to pull out. And if you're having trouble with them still not taking to the foundation, I made a video last week about feeding bees, and one of the things I mentioned in there is that the syrup that you make, that 1-to-1 syrup that you're going to be feeding your bees in the springtime, and you should be adding like that amino boost and honeybee healthy, that stuff the bees really love and attracts them. And so you put just a little bit of extra into a spray bottle, and you can spray down foundation with that just to attract the bees a little bit more. Jean says, why do the bees pull drone pupa out of the hive? The varroa mites will lay their eggs on the drone pupa first because they take the longest to pupate, so it gives their babies the longest time. And that's where over 95% of the varroa mites in a hive is on the pupating bees. The females will go in the cell right before it's capped, lay their eggs. The eggs will hatch. Those mites will breed, and there's just like numerous life cycles going on inside the cell, and they're all just feeding off of the pupa. So the pupa might hatch and just have deformed wings or deformed legs or just a whole bunch of viruses and be weak, or the pupa might not hatch at all. And so bees will pull out that infected pupa with all of those varroa mites. Ronald says it was recommended to me to put a blowtorch to the boxes prior to adding the frames. Yeah, that is something you can do. I feel like Gary is probably the only person that might really know the answer to this, but I don't remember what that does. I don't know if it is for the wood or if it kills anything that might be living in there. Because I don't think you can do that to the frames. Our frames are made from pretty low quality wood. I think it might be too soft, and that's where you're usually seeing a lot of the wax moth. But I've never done that to my hives. I feel like that's a Japanese beekeeping practice, but I don't remember why. The place I worked for, when they made a beekeeping museum, they torched panels of to use to make boxes, and they actually paneled the lower half of the room with these torched box panels for just like the aesthetic. And I thought she said that that was a Japanese practice in beekeeping, but I don't remember the reason for it. Backbee Broken Beekeeping says careful with mothballs. Has to be a very specific type or it can be deadly to bees. Yeah, I can't really imagine that being good to put in the hive. Even if it's not deadly, I would imagine that they would hate the smell of it and not use it. I've never tried it. It's not something I recommend, but it is something that some people do. Pete says, have you ever used black walnut shavings in your smoker? No, I have not. As a VDM treatment, I have not. Never tried it. If anyone has, let me know. Interesting. I'll write that down. I'll have to look more into it. Black walnut shavings. Marine Life Conservation says, where do you buy your freezer? Is there a link? Amazon? I got mine at Lowe's because I'm in Hawaii. No one's going to ship to me. There's a lot of things that people will not ship to on Amazon or otherwise here in Hawaii. So got mine at Lowe's. Costco was a lot more expensive. I don't remember the brand, but it's still going strong years later. It was just a 12 cubic foot, which was a nice size for fitting an entire boxes stacked up, and it had hanging baskets. But if you don't have as many hives, then that's probably not necessary. And you can get away with just like a 3 cubic foot. You just stand the frames up, and you can fit, I think, at least 20 to 30 inside there. Probably more like 20, and then stuff on top of that. Gary says, replace old frames. Wax moth love darker comb. Long time buildup of brood skins within cells or protein nutrient nurseries. Scrape bottom boards. Reduce entrance. Help guards repel. Yeah, that's a good tip. Those brood frames are what the wax moth love. So having a lot of just extra frames in your hive in general is not good when your hive population is small and it is one brood box or less. And if you have some of those old frames sitting out, those are going to be the ones that the wax moth take to first. So if you just have a little bit of room in your refrigerator or freezer, those are going to be the frames that, if you don't want to get rid of them, going to be the ones that you should be protecting first. Marine Life Conservation says they're ventilated beekeeping suits that we use. They work well to keep the beekeeper cool and protect. A little expensive, but worth it. Forest Beekeeping Supply has them. Thanks for that tip. Weston says, are dry unscented Swiffer sheets a good trap for small hive beetles? Yeah, they're okay. They're better than the ones that you put oil in, the beetle blasters. I use the Brawny Dynamax sheets. I feel like the Swiffer sheets have just a slight scent to them, even though they are unscented. But they supposedly work the same as Brawny Dynamax towels. I bought a box of Brawny Dynamax towels like over 5 years ago, and I've been using them since. So I don't use the Swiffer sheets, but they're supposed to be equivalent to the Brawny towels. And the bees, it depends on the hive. Most hives, the bees chew up the towel and then the beetles get stuck in the towel. For some of the hives, the beetles don't get stuck in the towel, the bees don't chew it up, but they will walk under the towel, and then there will be a bee that guards it and just keeps them trapped under there. So when you take the lid off the hive, you just take your hive tool and scrape over the towel and squish the beetles that are stuck under there. And some hives don't use the towel whatsoever. I'd say it's like 7 out of 10 hives use the sheet the proper way, and then you just have a percentage that it doesn't work well on. And it's just one of those things where sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Trelawney says, I'm wondering if I might put frames in my chest cooler I use for summer camping. Yeah, and ideally you would freeze them first, but places that are like airtight, that have a seal on them, are where you can put frames and keep them safe from rodents and wax moth and small hive beetle over the wintertime. I mean, if the cooler is big enough, then yeah. And I haven't checked out the Hive Butler, but those are the size for frames to hold them. And I don't know if they have as good of a seal, but that's another option too. All right, I can look at a couple more comments and then I gotta go because it's 2:30 and getting late. Marine Life Conservation says, is it too late in the season to apply apivar strips? It isn't if it's necessary. That's the way I look at things. Like, your number one goal is, if you are looking to lower your varroa mite levels using treatments. There's always, the fact that some people don't want to. But if you are looking to lower your varroa mite levels and use a treatment if necessary, it doesn't matter how much honey is in the hive, how much honey the bees are bringing in. If the mite levels are high, like say they're 7 or higher, your goal is to lower that before they are overrun with viruses and it is too late and you're not going to be able to save the hive from either collapsing or absconding, which is when all the bees take off. And so do what you need to do to lower your varroa mite levels and deal with the fact that you have tainted honey and comb later. Meaning all of that stuff is just for them, for feed, and that you are not going to be consuming it. Though I believe Apivar says otherwise about whether that comb can be used or not. But I don't harvest honey for human consumption. If any kind of treatment was in the hive, that's my standard. Apivar uses amitraz. So if it is hot out, I believe Apivar is one of the few varroa mite treatments that can be used no matter the time of year. It is not like formic acid in Apogard, which uses something that requires like ventilation in the hive and has temperature restrictions. So if it is getting hot out, Apovar is like one of your few options. You can also vaporize your hive with oxalic acid, but that is going to be very tricky if your hive is getting full and very active because it does not affect the brood um, behind that beeswax capping. So you're going to have to administer it like every 5 to 7 days for like about 5 weeks in a row. Um, so yeah, but if your varroa mite levels aren't too high, you just haven't treated yet and you're worried, is first do a mite test and see what is going on within the hive. And you can put drone comb, drone foundation into your hive, and hopefully bees will build comb off of that, and you can try to trap mites that way. And there are you can also break the brood cycle and split the hive, take the queen out, put her into a split. Um, you can trap the queen and break the brood cycle. And all of those mites that are, 95% of the mites that are on those pupating bees are going to be hatching, and they are going to be looking for new pupa. Those females are going to be looking for new places to hide, and they're not going to find them because um, eventually there's not going to be any more larva present, and then they're going to go elsewhere. So there are natural methods to lowering your varroa mite levels if you don't want to use a treatment this time of year. But if you're fine with it, I wouldn't worry about the honey production. Let's see. Gary says, years ago, I put springs of wild spearmint on top bars for tracheal mites, like thyme oil and honeybee healthy in syrup. I think helped lesser wax moths. Course time of year, weak hives, and darkness breeds little critters. Wild spearmint. See, there have been a lot of, I really have to do a little bit more research about the essential oils and herbs to control small hive beetles, wax moth, and varroa mites. It sounds like the spearmint and peppermint are great for small hive beetles, and I guess maybe wax moth also. I'm curious why, like are they deterred by that? But if it's not affecting the bees and it's affecting the beetles and the moths, then that's great. Has anyone seen an occasional wax moth fly out of a hive when popping the lid? Seems like they lie in wait, tight cracks, waiting for the opportunity to lay eggs to avoid being chased out of the boxes. I've never seen one in a live beehive. I don't think. They're usually, I see them when I'm pulling out old beekeeping equipment. Yeah, that clip I showed on the shorts video of the wax moth ducking in and out of the cells. People got really, they were kind of rude. They kept saying that he wasn't hiding, he was just falling, and he didn't seem to care that there were bees around. And I was like, I don't know. I don't really think wax moths are graceful creatures. I mean, they're a little worm falling into a hole. Like, I don't think they're gonna do that nicely, easily, gracefully if they're running away from bees. But yeah, those bees didn't chase the wax moth. They were nurse bees. It was there was bees hatching. It was a frame of brood, and that wax moth, well, I thought was hiding. Some people say it wasn't hiding. It was just climbing around and doing its own thing. You should check it out and see. If you're on my YouTube channel, you just scroll down, there's different playlists, and one of them says shorts, and it's not that far into it. It probably the title says watch this wax moth caterpillar hide or something like that. Running Ace Iron Man says, I see a few ants on my hive running around. Is that okay? Most of the time it is. Some people say that there are ants that have killed their hives. I haven't experienced that here, but there are a lot of species of ants that aren't here in Hawaii. I do see ants in my hives quite frequently since my hives, termites are quite a problem here in Hawaii, and they do eat my beekeeping equipment, and I don't do anything about it. So when I have some boxes that just obviously have termite damage, and when I put them on the hive, I will, and I take boxes apart, I'll see ants running around holding eggs and stuff, and I've never seen an issue with it. I've never noticed them causing trouble within the hive. I've never seen a bee chasing after it. So the ants that we have here, I haven't had a problem with. And for the most part, I think most ants aren't causing damage to hives, but some ants can. Harmon says, do different species of bees deal better with beetles or wax moth? Good question. I have no idea. I mean, when you look at the big picture, you want the species of bee that deals with varroa mites because wax moth and small hive beetle are opportunistic pests. And if you are not introducing them to your hive, putting in old equipment that has an infestation, and you can easily freeze it or clean it to prevent that, and your hive has a strong population, they won't collapse due to those. But varroa mites can take a strong hive and cause it to collapse. And then small hive beetles and wax moth can then, like the 1-2 punch, they just cause the final collapse. But the initial toppling of this hive is due to varroa mites. So even if there was a kind of bee that dealt with wax moth and small hive beetle better, if they didn't deal with varroa mites better, then I don't think it matters. But I would assume that there are maybe bees that deal with all pests better, and a lot of it is the hygienics of the hive, just keeping the hive clean. If they are removing infected pupa from the hive, if they are cleaning the hive so that there's no pollen and other pieces for small hive beetle larva and wax moth larva to feed off of. Every time I do a live video, my watch beeps at me telling me I reached my step goal for the day because I move my arms around and it thinks I'm walking. It's funny. Anyway, I mean, it's probably all similar. If the bees deal with varroa mites well, then I'm sure that they're dealing with wax moth and hive beetle fairly well too. What bees deal with varroa mites better? They brought Russian bees over because the theory was that they would deal with varroa mites the best, and Africanized bees. We don't have either of those here in the state. And this is where a lot of the big queen breeders are. So I haven't been able to spend enough time like working to breed my hives to get to that level that they are dealing with varroa mites well with their genetics, because I feel like we're just way too limited here. We're not allowed to bring in new genetics, new colonies actually, to the islands. So as far as I'm aware, we just have Italian, German, and they're maybe Carniolan. They deal with varroa mites and small hive beetle wax moth pretty well, to be honest, considering how high the population is here. But I don't know if it would be better than other bees. All right, I have to go because my throat is getting a little hoarse. I wish I could see all of you guys. I feel like I'm just talking to myself. But maybe one day. things will change. Pablo says, have you had experience dealing with very small queens barely distinguishable from workers? Yes, and they usually they're not fertile, and they don't really lay much when they're that small. Thanks to everyone for tuning in, and I will chat with you guys next time. I haven't been posting as many videos, and that's because I've been working on videos that are a little bit longer and just not posting them as often. So next week I will post a video, hopefully, the plan, that is a little bit more in depth and detailed about comb honey. How I do it from start to finish, from setting up the hive to how I harvest and the sale and stuff of comb honey. And then the week after that, I go live, but just to people that are students of my class and members. And you can become a student for free. So if you want to join that video, you are more than welcome to. Without having to pay for it, but you do just have to go to my course at beekeepingmadesimple.com and sign up for a membership. And then I send out a link to that via email, and you can only access the live video if you have the email. If you are a member of the channel, then it's on the community board, the link to that. I do have beekeeping t-shirts. If you go to beekeepingmadesimple.com, there's an apparel link. I have one that says, I have to check my bees, which is my personal favorite because beekeepers tend to prefer the company of insects to humans, I have found. I don't think I'm the only one, really. I think a lot of beekeepers do. So that one was where that inspiration came from. If you have ideas for other things you want to see on shirts, let me know, because I don't make the shirts and mail them out. It's like a online print on demand service. So if you order a shirt, they get it, they print out the color, the shirt size, and they mail it out to you. So literally I can make any design we want to, and it would be at no cost to me other than my time to post it. And they make one shirt and that would be it, and it doesn't really affect much. All right, have a good weekend, everybody. It is already like 89 degrees. It was such a cool winter. It was wonderful, and now it is so hot. It got so hot so fast. Crazy. I hope some of you guys have some nice spring weather to enjoy. It is normally my favorite time of year. Bye.